Hi and welcome everyone to ABG's Investor Days. My name is Stefan Knutsson. I'm an equity analyst here at ABG, following our next company, which is Flexion Mobile. And with me today on link, I have the CFO, Niklas Koresar. Welcome, Niklas. I leave the floor to you.
Thanks, Stefan, and sorry for not being able to be in person, but I got stuck. I got stuck in London from where I'm presenting. So I'm representing Flexion Mobile. So we are a games marketing company, and what we do is we help basically the biggest game developers to reach revenues outside their two main stores in the mobile space. And that is a space that has become very, very hot. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Is that the developers are struggling with the industry at the moment a little bit because macro numbers are not that favorable. But they're also, in the past, they've been relying very much on being able to buy users, basically through Facebook. And Apple has kind of closed down the ability to track the users you acquire. So you have to do your marketing in blind at the moment. So they are struggling with growth. On the other side, the two dominant stores, Google and Apple, are under a lot of pressure from regulatory reasons. So you have the Digital Marketing Act in Europe, and you have all the fights between Epic and, for example, Apple in the US. So the regulatory bodies are now breaking up these big entities, basically opening up for alternative distribution. So when we're now talking to the big developers, and we have always pushed for this market, but in the past have been relatively small. But now we spoke to one big developers, and they are now saying that their budget for the next 12 or 18 months on Android, which is half the mobile market, their budget is to do 25% of the revenues outside Google, which is kind of unheard of for us, because in the past they were doing 100% in Google and Android, and we had to convince them to generate more revenues. So now they're all talking, oh shit, I need to do 25% of my revenues outside Google. How do I do that? Do I set up 10 different strategies myself, or I do 3 and Flexion can do the rest for us? So there is a lot of interest for what we're doing at the moment. And if we look a bit more in detail on the numbers, if you go for the next slide, Stefan, just a snapshot of where we are. So we generated in the Q1, which released last week, about 60 million pounds, which we are almost on a run rate of $100 million as a company on an annualized basis. We grew by 50%. EBITDA grew more to about 0.7 million pounds, and the cash flow was down this quarter. It's just short-term effects on working capital, but in general, we have a negative working capital, which is where when you grow, your cash increases. So we sit on a very healthy cash balance in the company of 12 million pounds. Next slide, please. So what we do as a company is that, as I said, we are a marketing company for the big game developers around the world. We work in 2 verticals, alternative distribution and influence marketing. I'll come back to what that is. But basically what we do is we help the big developers to grow the revenues. It's very simple. Next slide. We are on the gaming market, which is, of course, is a massive, massive market, $200 billion, where mobile is about half of that. The alternative distribution, as I mentioned, is mobile only, and there we focus on Android at the moment. And influencer marketing, our other service stack, is across everything. So we do, PC and Apple, for example, and console. So it's across the whole market, and that's quite attractive because you can then follow your big customers over into more segments of the market. Next slide, please. So where we are in the value chain, if you look at distribution, where is most of our revenue still, is that when we focus on these big developers around the world, they, as I said, they focus on their 2 markets, which is Google and Apple. And now recently they start to see how they can generate revenues outside. But that market is very fragmented and consists of a lot of very, very big app stores and opportunities, but they're still, for the developer, quite small. So I mentioned here some of the stores we're working with is Amazon, Samsung, Huawei, one store in Korea, and some more new opportunities. But they are representing for us about 10% of Google Play. So that is maybe 4-5% of what a developer generates globally. So each of those opportunities one opportunity is not big enough. So you need to combine it into one to make it an attractive offer. And that is what we have managed to crack. And I think we're fair to say we're the only people who can offer this. So we become the third distribution pipe for these developers in the market, and we take care about the rest, I'd say. And then we have this second vertical, which is influencer marketing with audience lead. Next slide, please. So how can Flexion build up this market position on this massive, massive market where we can say we are a world leader on something that today is really, really hot? Because we are still, compared to the developers, we're a very small company. And first of all, I think it's fair to say we were the first to really properly focus on this one. So we've done this now for 10 years, and we were world leading back in the Nokia Ericsson days on this. And thereafter, we just continue to build and build and build for what's happening today. So you're clearly a first mover. And that means that when you slowly build up your tech, your games portfolio and your distribution, it's very hard for someone else to come in because they're not, even if someone finds our tech, they wouldn't have the games and they wouldn't have the distribution. So they're nothing to offer. So you have to start, have to build it up slowly, very slowly. And because we've done it, we do create or have very high barriers. It's very hard for others to come in. That also means that our portfolio is the leading portfolio in the world at the moment as a third party. I think I said it before, I looked at it was a half year ago or whatever it was, that what our games are generating globally, not just for us, but for everyone, I think we're 2 to 3 times all the big mobile games of all publicly listed games companies in Scandinavia. So we are working with a really high-end portfolio, and that means that we're the biggest distributor of games into our stores. So we work very closely with the stores. What is also becoming more and more important here is actually, and that is our tech. And what we do is we can repackage the games for new distribution without the developer having to do anything themselves. And because we have kind of control or access to the games, we can then, when all these new trends are now coming up to the market, when everyone are looking for alternative ways to make money, we can follow the trends really early because we can justify investments on a very large portfolio of games. And we can also build, enable the tech relatively easy compared to anyone else. So we're definitely following new trends really quickly. And that is very important now because the market is opening up. It became wider and more fragmented for every day. And I think it's fair to say Flexion loves fragmentation. We're also now pitching more and more towards the developer with a multi-service offering with influencer marketing and potential new opportunities. So when we go to developers, the offering becomes more and more interesting, which helps us win big contracts. Next slide, please. There are 2 KPIs I think you should follow if you want to track us. And one is how much we make on what we call top tier games. So it's over $140,000 per month per game. And so that's about $1.5 million in Google Play. And we grown the portfolio over a year from 5 to 8 of these really big titles. But what we also managed to do is to grow the average revenue of those games quite a lot. We had a super strong Q2 and Q3 last year. And that is, we were in a really successful initial launch campaigns or some massive games we signed basically a year and a half ago. So it really drove those revenues. And then the Q4 was also very strong. But in the Q4, we also added one more game, which is not that big. And now when we come into the quite dull Q1, that eighth game is dragging down the numbers a bit. But we're still generating here 40% growth over a year. So Flexion is steaming along. We mentioned in the quarterly report also that we have two drivers for this KPI, which we are quite excited about, to be honest. And that is that we have signed a couple of kind of large mid-sized games where we announced in the quarterly report we've seen some really good traction on the games. And that is because they respond to user acquisition in our channel. So combined with the developer, can really start driving those revenues. And that means that, let's see how big they become, but that, and maybe with a bit of more distribution, when we add now more and more distribution channels, makes them potential top-tier games, which make us not just signing really big games that comes to become big, but we can build mid-sized games and push them up into the top-tier game. So that's a very interesting trend. It's very early. We mentioned that is from March onwards. So that is a trend where it hopefully generate revenue in Q3, Q4 this year. And the other one is that we signed a big portfolio of games, so we extended it earlier this year. And there are two games there that hasn't been launched. And we mentioned here that those two games in the quarterly report are $9 million in revenue in Google Play, where we're supposed to do, say, 10%. That number is now $16 million because one of those games, it was a recently launched game, and that is just shooting off. It goes to the sky at the moment. So let's see where it end up, and let's see how well it responds in our channels. But the potential is growing for every day. So there's two things that is interesting. Those games are not live yet. So again, it's a Q3, Q4 effect for us, hopefully, and beyond. Thanks. Next slide. And the other one is the marginal cost of the company, and especially within the distribution. So we built this platform, and we announced it back in the days for 50 and 50. We spoke about 50 games, spoke about 100 games. So the platform has almost unlimited scalability in itself. But what happened was that back then we couldn't imagine that we would sign these super big titles so early in the company's history. So we imagined that we would have a large portfolio of mid-sized games. But because now we were so successful with big ones, we kind of gone for a slightly bit smaller portfolio, but with much higher revenues. But that means that the scalability is there, and the marginal cost of taking in games is very, very low for us. And if you look at it, the 8 games we have, and it's 2 in ramp up coming in. So you're talking about 90% of the revenues from those games. So the rest of the portfolio, maybe, a smaller game there make $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 per month. And we're still in a process where we can throw out, let's say, $20,000 game, add an $800,000 game, and you have 40 times revenue without any cost at all. And that's the process we're at the moment. I think we also said that we're slowly getting the quality on the mid-sized portfolios getting better. So maybe one day we can start growing up beyond 30, but we are still at this phase where we kind of build up the quality of the portfolio. Next slide, please. We acquired Audiensely where we entered influencer marketing. It's basically a year ago. And that is a market that's become quite hot, actually, in gaming. And first of all, it's a new way to market your games because Stockholm knows all about it. It's influencers everywhere. It's a very effective way to market a game. You have an influencer who have a very big follower base, and they say, "Oh, play this game, it's great," blah blah, and then you go, the follower base following it. And there we found Audiensely. We spoke to them for over a year before we acquired them. and they are focusing on the big brands, the big game developers like ourselves, and they focus on the kind of high-end influencers, which is primarily on YouTube. And that is it's been very, very happy with this acquisition. The team is great, and the position is very, very strong. In terms of growth, they grew a lot last year, and this year, I think it's fair to say that if you look on their margins they kind of retained very strong margins in the business in the traditionally quite weak Q1 and also Q2, maybe with a little bit lower growth. So they're kind of not destroying their own market by going for growth instead of profitability. So it's more to come. That in terms of EBITDA, we're also building up that entity for especially within sales and a little bit of junior management to kind of enable that company to grow a lot going forward. And it's also here, so with the sales staff, we do in Audiensely, but also in Flexion, and it's all about cross-selling between the two, because they also work with 250 biggest developers, but they're different influencers, developers than us, so it's cross-selling. Next slide, thanks. Yeah, total revenue, I mentioned this. We grew by distribution organically 37%, group basis by over 50%. Q1 is down, it's very dull quarter, but it's also based on some really strong numbers in Q2, 3, and 4 last year. We still on a little bit longer term generate a lot of revenues. Those numbers, those games, the potential is still the same as before. We work a lot on adding distribution, so for us it's just to add distribution and get those games really up and flying again as we are. The potential is there for sure. We guided for 20 to 40% growth over the year, and that is without any massive blockbuster games, and it's without any M&A activities. So yeah, we're working along. We said that we're on track to deliver for that for the year in the quarter report. Next slide. On EBITDA, I mentioned this, marginal cost is low, especially for distribution, but this is including Audiensely, where you see that gross profit is growing more than staff cost, and your EBITDA is shooting up. In Q1, what we've done over the year is here that we're increasing a staff cost. We also reorganized the whole company to be able to enable more M&A. So we built up a proper group function, so we have, group HR, head of HR, group legal, new accounting systems, etc. So we invested a bit in cost here to enable M&A, which I think you can see a little bit in those numbers, but that's short terms, jumps in the numbers. Next slide. We've been IFRS accounting for a long time. We don't capitalize development costs. So we have a very direct relationship between EBITDA and cash flow in the company. But then you have, especially when you acquire companies, you have a lot of intangible write-offs, etc., or not write-offs, but amortization, which affects the number. But this is something you can read on before. I just want to mention we're IFRS. Next one. This is the final slide. So just to summarize, so we're a marketing company for games. We grow revenues and user bases for game developers, for the big game developers around the world. Work in 2 verticals: alternative distribution, which is a market we own and where we are world leaders, full stop. Where we went into influencer marketing, is one of the bigger companies which focus specifically on gaming, and that market, that is something we're looking how we can make them one of the real world leaders in that one. We're working on that, and then we're looking into if we should enter a 3rd vertical, and it's what we're looking for is highly strategical. Something, if we can go to the other slide, it's okay. I don't know. It's highly strategical. So we're not going to do any roll-up strategy, and it's what we're looking for is specifically sales synergies between the verticals, and it's niche markets, what I call kind of cool small niche markets on a massive market, on $100 billion market or a $200 billion market, where we have the opportunity to become world leaders. So yeah, that is what we focus on. our market is happening at the moment, and yeah, it's super exciting. So thank you.
Thank you, Niklas. I have a question here regarding a slide you showed earlier, and it's regarding your scalability within distribution, where you don't need to add as much cost when you add new games.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I guess it makes a lot of sense to broadening your portfolio. What will be needed from your side to, say, reach 20 top-tier games in a few years' time?
I think what's happening now is that we see, we mentioned it in the quarterly report, we see more and more inbound questions on what we're doing. And so basically, as I mentioned, I started by saying that the big developers are now looking at, they have budgets or target forecasts for budgets for reaching the market outside Google on Android. And for them to do it all by themselves from scratch is quite a big ask. So it's quite, I think it's fair to say that a lot of them are, oh shit, we spoke to those Flexion. Let's reactivate those discussions and see what they can offer. We're engaged in more and more discussions. Some of them may go themselves, for sure. That's how the market works. But there are coming up with more and more opportunities. The other big driver for us, which I think have the opportunity to attract more and more developers, is that because the market is opening up and Google and Apple can't kind of protect their market as they've done in the past, if you say it in a nicely way, there is more and more distribution opportunities coming. So we signed quite a strategic partnership with Digital Turbine. They have 100 million kind of users in the US, and they need to populate dedicated store for mobile operators, and we're going to help them with that. So that's another way we add distribution, and the more distribution you have, the higher your numbers become when you pitch to these really big developers. So that also attracts more. So it's definitely within grasps for us to get that number of developers for sure, or a number of games, without a doubt.
And how large would you say that your universe of games that you deem to be top tier eligible for you would be?
We talk about 250 developers, but if you look at, we say that for top tier is $1.5 million in Google Play, but the market is growing all the time. So is it 300, 400 games at the moment? I haven't looked for some time, but every time I look, it's more and more games are in that region. So it's what we look at is how much they make in Google Play as approximation, and I think it's 300 to 400 games that are there now. So it's growing all the time, and it's also renewing itself when new games are coming up and new successful developers. So the opportunity is big enough for us. You mentioned 20 and it's 300. It's not. Yeah, that's not a problem.
Yep. You also mentioned the 2 blockbuster titles that you signed in March. How excited are you about their potential? And would you say that the launch is imminent, or will it take some more time?
As I said before, I hope the launch is today, but it's not. It's, of course, both for us. We also haven't paid the developer the additional fee. So let's see when we can get those live. Of course, it's very important for us to get them live, and we work very hard on it. But it's I get more and more excited every day, because one of those games were in kind of soft launch, or have been a soft launch for a long time, and they released it 2 months ago, and it's going through the roof. Every time I look at it, the numbers are higher in Google Play. That doesn't mean it's not a perfect correlation to our market, but let's see. The opportunity is getting bigger and bigger for every day. So let's see there. It takes a little bit of time. You need to get them live. It takes a little bit of time to get them up. But what we saw last year was that those really big titles, they actually generated revenues quite early in the cycles, in the initial launch phases. But let's say they're not live yet. But we're definitely trying to get them live ASAP.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about increasing your portfolio of games, but you can also increase revenues by increasing your distribution power. Where do you see the largest potential between those two?
We said it's a kind of normal cycle. First, you build your tech, then you fill it up with products, and then you increase, get more and more customers to buy it. And I think we are in that third phase now where, and it's all about, it's coming a lot from the regulatory pressure on Google and Apple, so they can't be a bit nasty anymore. So everyone are now exploring the opportunities that they have been a little bit afraid of maybe doing in the past. So it's coming more and more and more. So that's the beauty here. We can still add more and more games, but our focus is distribution, which have an indirect effect that you hopefully get more games. So it's kind of two-dimensional growth here. And also the existing portfolio is so big. We generate 4% of total revenues. Why shouldn't that be 10, 20%? So existing games we can grow, new games we can grow, and it is actually quite exciting at the moment.
Perfect, Niklas. By that, I would like to thank you coming and presenting with us here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.